Well, today is a very special day as we are in the home of a very dear friend, meteorological icon Leon Hunsaker. And even though he's been retired from broadcast meteorology for quite a few years now, his passion for his love of weather and weather charts and patterns and storms hasn't faded a bit. In fact, he's been working on a project that has taken him back many, many years. And if you could see what we're seeing in his home today, on the walls, literally on the ceilings and over all the tables, are weather charts, data history, water, snowfall, snowpack. It's amazing. And Leon, I am so delighted to see how well you're doing. You look great.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Of course, looks can be deceiving, but I'm not complaining.
Well, listen, on the other side of 89, you look great. And thank you for giving us time to be in your home today. I am amazed that you and I go back to some similar grounds. I was born and raised in Sacramento, in the Sacramento Valley. As a traffic pilot, I flew over all of those rivers and all of that farmland and the Delta area and all out through the Sacramento-San Joaquin area, and I've seen it flooded a couple of times. I've lived through a couple of those floods, especially the big one in 1955 as a kid. But you were involved in an interesting case, as a witness for PG&E about some meteorological data that got them in trouble.
Well, actually, I started out with a very minor role, and believe it or not, I wound up with a major role because of some things I learned.
Now, how far back does that go?
Well, I joined PG&E just shortly after New Year's 1958.
All right, so since 1958 to today, you have never let this story go.
Well,
I mean, you've been a dog with a sock on this issue, right?
Well, it kept evolving. It kept. I just couldn't. Every time I'd think, well, now I've reached a plateau, I can put it away.
Yeah, but you've been working on this since 1958, and it really goes back to 1862. Tell us about that.
Well, the thing about the weather modification lawsuit, the reason I got found out about 1861 and 62 was the attorney was afraid that the opposition would come in and say, 1955 made cloud seeding made 1955 the worst flood of all time in that area, or at least that we knew about. And of course, digging into it, that's when I found out they're right. I couldn't find anything this side of 1900 that was greater than 1955, but I went back into the newspapers, and that's when I ran into 1861, 62, and that changed the whole thing.
All right. And your basic training in meteorology tells you that there are weather patterns that repeat themselves. Is that true? And so you followed it from 62 to 55 up to 62. You even fast forwarded up to 86, and then even the most recent one, which was 97. And we're talking about floods here in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Valley.
Right.
And you're seeing a pattern.
Well, the main thing I really believe is that history will repeat itself. That I used to question that some, but when I found out that this 1861-62 had their origins out of the subtropics right here in Southern California, and good old, and down into far east is Arizona. When I found that out, I became a convert to the idea, yes, it will happen again. Because about that time they were having those huge floods in Tennessee, in that area.
Right.
And they had an origin that came right out of the subtropics. And that, hey, All
right, now part of your concern is that the dams and the levee systems in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Valley possibly could not handle another 1862.
That's exactly right.
And you have testified at various symposiums. You have told Corps of Engineers, you have warned everybody that the next big one is still to come. And yet you see a pattern here that cannot be ignored.
Well, I think it's going to happen. I admit I would have to classify it, the whole 1861-62, I'd have to classify it as a rare event. But that doesn't mean that it can't happen next year. It also doesn't mean that it might be 1 or 2 centuries down the road before it happens.
But there's some patterns here, Leon. Let's take 97. It happened just like that.
Yeah.
Within 3 days, we saw Southern Oregon and Northern California beyond flood stage. It was over everything.
Well, yeah, but look at it, Perry. 1861-62, there was a flood the first part of December that I would classify in the same ballpark as 97, February of 86. That was before the big show that came on in January. And they had some really impressive storms in the latter part of December that dumped a lot of snow in the mountains. We had there was a series of 3 of them that hit the last part of December. And the last one was a warm one that put rain on the lower edge of the first 2. Then we got a cold wave in January that came along and had to freeze that part of the snow that we got rain on it. And then, so you got a sheet of ice there, as well as some frozen ground, because we estimate the temperature at around 5,000 feet. In early January of 1862 got down to 0 degrees. And then the last thing, you dump heavy snow on top of that. Well, if you got ice on, say, maybe 10% or 15% of the watershed underneath that snow, when the rain comes through, it can't penetrate that ice, huh?
And you found out in some of your research that the melt-off runs from the bottom first. The melting of the snow comes from the bottom first.
Yeah.
Now, there's another part of this that's so interesting. You could have the ice, you could have the snow, and then instantly you could have warm weather.
Yeah.
And that is the issue.
That's the issue.
Because I remember as a young boy in 1955 when the levees broke in the Sacramento levees broke, and then up through Yuba City, those towns were wiped out instantly. And then back when I was flying in the 70s for the traffic plane there, I'd fly out over the causeway, and when all of that would flood, you would begin to see these levees break. They just couldn't hold the volume of water. And those levees have never been repaired.
No. Well, I can't think of his name right now, the man out at University of California, Davis, in charge of their watershed research program. He says there's 1,100 miles of fragile levee in the Delta region.
That couldn't hold another big flood.
No.
All right, now, your research has shown that, first of all, the data was not properly carried forward, and you were very concerned about that.
Well, I'm concerned that there were things overlooked.
Right.
For example, there's a report that the Department of Water Resources put out, the very last sentence in their report. And this was put out in 1998, 99, somewhere along in there. And they said that the only thing we don't know is the size of the snowpack.
Mm. And you've done some research on that.
Well, that was what Claude and I dug in there and went to work on. We wanted to write a reference book, pull all of this stuff together so people down the road could take a look at that and at least know what the conditions were. Right. The conditions were not being described right. And I'd like to go back to one thing and finish. I didn't finish. About all that in December, a major storm flood in the first part of December, similar to 97 and 86. Then, all of that activity in the latter part of December that I described, but then come January, 2 floods that I am convinced were both larger than either 86 or 97. You got all of that in about a 55-day period.
Wow.
Say, and so you might weather the first one, but what do you think about the levees softening up, huh? And here comes the next one.
And then the water saturation point.
Yeah, see, that's what's not really being discussed.
All right, now it's interesting, fast forward to 2012, they have some dams in place, and you're worried that even though they may have a plan, it doesn't seem to be a reasonable plan that could handle that volume of water.
Well, I admire their operating plan. As I understand it, they're going to drop the level of Folsom Lake from what it holds now, roughly, with their upgrades, about 1,250,000 acre-feet, in advance of the next flood. Based on a forecast, they're going to drop the level of Folsom Lake down to 400,000 acre-feet.
All right, now, what if they're wrong?
What you're talking about is the poor weatherman is not going to be sleeping very well at night that has to make that forecast. Yes.
No, but okay, but if they did that let's say all the signs line up, the storm's coming, and then it turns and goes north or something, and they've dropped the level of the lake down, what have they done to themselves?
Well, if I was the forecaster that made that forecast, I think I would get me a raincoat and put the collar way up, dark glasses.
And leave town.
Because next summer, the water skiers aren't going to be very happy, and certainly the farmers aren't, because of the lack of water. And you see, we even looked into that. In 2003, there was one that did just about the way you described, but at the last minute, all the signals for that flood, I even checked them out, went clear back, just like I checked the December 1964 flood out. Found out it was triggered by what went on in the North Atlantic. It was in that category in 2003, and last minute, ridge of high pressure built along the west coast shoved the jet stream north. Portland winds up with a 1 in 25, 30-year ice storm. Down here, there was heavy rain in a few along parts of the Oregon coast, very heavy rain. But that was it.
Okay.
Nothing.
It's just a delight to talk to you, Leon, and know that you're not just out growing carrots in your garden, that your life's passion of storm watching and the jet streams, and I still think you are right on another point, and that is that you and I called it the English connection.
Oh, yeah.
And what happens in England about 12 or 13 days later, that pattern shows up over the West Coast?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I looked at how old I was and was trying to estimate how much longer I'm going to be around. I was working on 2 projects, the English connection and still associated with this flood issue. And I had to make a choice. I'll tell you what I think about the English connection. If I was researching that, and I'm positive, I've done enough research, I feel very confident that if we could pull all the stuff together and I could see what's going on around the entire northern hemisphere, I could find out why there are times it doesn't work. That was to be the way I would approach it. And
wow.
If I could live long enough, I'd love to do that because it has all kinds of possibilities.
Well, I'm going to pray that the good Lord grants you a few more years, because I think you're onto something there, because
well,
there is a pattern, isn't there? What happens over England and that part of the world, over Europe, it comes back around through the jet stream and it's over us about 10 or 14 days later.
Well, you know, I always was concerned myself about this triggering the flood. Pardon me, I have to scratch my back just a little bit. There's an itch there. This December will be the 48th anniversary of my 3-day December 1964 flood forecast.
That's right.
And it really, when we found out, we forecasted on the basis of what was going on in the northeast Atlantic Ocean, the trigger that pulled the trigger that triggered the flood. I got thinking, well, gee, does it go the other half of the hemisphere? And it wasn't long after that, October 1966, I found the same thing. The trigger was off the west coast of the United States. that went across the country, the the Atlantic, and dove down toward the Mediterranean and drove a storm that had been sitting around Spain, picking up moisture, into Italy, and that was the big flood, caused the big floods in Italy. The worst floods in Italy since the 14th century.
Well, there you go. Now, back to the Central Valley of California and your concern. It all started back from when you were asked to do some testimony work for PG&E in a lawsuit there, and you begin to see some patterns of storms, and you begin to realize there was some data that was neglected as far back as, what, 1862, that that part of the Sacramento Valley is still in for another big one. And because the patterns are there, the research is there, you're seeing it there. You're also concerned that perhaps you're not being paid that much attention to with your data.
Well, we had a news, this last, real quick, the symposium that they hold each year on extreme precipitation at the University of California, Davis. I managed to wangle away onto that program in 2010. And anyway, they had their program for 2012 was the 150th anniversary of the 1862 flood.
Wow. And
they wouldn't let me on the program. And I complained.
Now, why do you think that is? I mean, it
Well,
almost sounds conspiratorial, but why do you think
I think they asked me what my subject is going to be, and I say the precipitation on the American River watershed has been underestimated. And
so are you, what I'm hearing you maybe say is they don't want to hear it because they're not prepared to handle it.
Well, everybody has special interests. I mean, there are.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
Let's be honest about it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not that far from grass, so I'm going to call it the way it is.
Yeah.
Everybody has a special interest. And I understand that. But in my opinion, that special interest has interfered with public safety. You see, the thing that I object to is this. It's complicated, and I'll capsulize it the best I can. Considering the years now, okay? All right, I might even have a senior moment or two here, so bear with me. What you do if everything is done, I hate to use this word, it sounds harsh, responsibly, is you set realistic flood boundaries. If you set realistic flood boundaries, then you don't build houses out in the floodplain.
Right.
And there have been thousands of homes now in the Sacramento Valley and down far built in the floodplain.
Called the Natomas area, and that's where I was born and raised.
And
yeah.
I think this part of it's kind of interesting.
Right.
Until we started to stir the pot, none of the responsible agencies ever made any kind of a horseback or common sense estimate of what the peaks were in 1862.
All right, and the differences in what they're using and what you came up with are very significant.
Yeah. Their official deal now is 320,000, as they figure is the peak on the American River at Folsom. We say it's close to 500,000.
That's acre cubic feet.
That's in cubic feet per second. That's
cubic
flow.
feet per second. All right, now in Sacramento, from downtown Sacramento north up towards where the airport is, as you head towards Yolo County.
Yes.
They are beefing up the east side of the Sacramento River levee, and it goes just past the airport. Yeah. Now that sounds very political to me because the only thing they're trying to protect is the houses in the Natomas area and the Sacramento International Airport. Yeah. Anything north of that is in trouble.
Yeah, that's true.
And the water could still backtrack back down through there.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because you're talking Yuba City again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Leon, do you feel accomplished now that you've figured it out?
I'll put it this way. I was invited this last, in 2010 to come be on their program, and I appreciate that very much because the program had already been set. It was really an act of kindness I'll never forget from Gary Estes. Then when they held this year's program and they turned me down, about coming down, they asked me what I wanted to talk about. And they did not see, in the spring they asked me to make an estimate of what we thought it was in 1862, and they put it on their website. I have to give them credit for that. But the research, this was a year ago, last spring, the research was not complete. We just hadn't ground through all of the details and didn't have quite the vision we've got now. Well, anyway, when the newspaper reporter came up and he went out, left here, and went down and interviewed a lot of these people. And all of them were saying that the value, the peak flow on the American River at Folsom was roughly 320,000. We're saying it's close to 500,000. Then they come back, and this is, in all fairness to them, I would do probably the same thing. They kind of went after me as, you really don't, what the bottom line was, you really don't have the expertise, the background to comment on these things. You really shouldn't be in this discussion. Well, the thing is, they don't know what my background is. You see, and that bothers me a little bit. But anyway, our retort was, we challenged the Corps of Engineers and the Department of Water Resources to a public debate, purchased a half-page ad in the Sacramento News and Review, and issued a challenge. Now, we didn't expect to hear anything from them. They had set the stage already. Oh, he's just that guy in Southern Oregon. He and Claude, they're just a couple of guys in Southern Oregon, you know. That, pretty soon they'll, you know, they're old guys. Pretty soon they'll go below grass and the whole thing will blow over. And that's one reason why I'm raising Cain, is because I know grass isn't far away. But what I have to say, and what we have to say, is important. And people need to understand that it's there.
They have never taken the time to counter your information.
No, I have invited them.
Okay, so
I've shared some material with them. I sent stuff, original stuff we'd done on the peak flow. When we expanded that graph that I showed you, put out by the National Research Council, and I understand that the Corps of Engineers actually developed that graph that shows the relationship between 3-day flow and peak flow. And we got an expert in by the name of Holger Summers to help us expand the graph so that we could plug in information and actually show what these peaks would be.
All right. My last closing question. Do you think that the Sacramento-San Joaquin Valley is far from another major flood?
Well, as I said before, it could happen next year. To get something of the order of 1861-62 could be another 1 or 2 centuries. Because look how far.
But if you take the 100-year floods and the 150-year floodplains, then your calculations come into bear.
Well, I don't think they have. I'll put it this way. I don't know what their calculations are, but I don't think that they have established reasonable floodplain boundaries.
Okay, Leon. So you've finished your research. You're happy with it. You're confident you got the truth, and you're laying your head on the pillow at night, going, "Yep, I'm right."
Well, we are right. We've got it. We can prove without a doubt that Snell's measurements are right.
All right. Well, let me encourage you to continue on with the English connection now. And remember, your buddy over at theDove believes in it. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you, Leon, for your time.
Well, Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to tell the story that Claude and I have worked on for so many years.
You're a delight. Thanks.
Thanks.